So these are 3 great ways to have impact with community cat programs, but what if everything you do, you implement all of this, it's still not enough and cats are still dying in your shelter unnecessarily? Dr. Hurley from UC Davis and I have been giving a lot more thought to the idea of whether we really should be taking in cats from the community, especially if the risk that they face in the shelter is much higher than what they face in the community. And just to take my community as an example, Alachua County, these are some calculators you can use to estimate how many cats are in your community. So we have about 68,000 pet cats, 60% of which go outdoors, so 42,000 pet cats going outdoors, about 38,000 unowned community cats outdoors. Like all shelters, almost without exception, our cat euthanasia rate is directly related to intake. If we take in fewer cats, there are fewer cats euthanized. So we do have a lot of programs to have happier outcomes, trying to increase adoption, but it is very hard for shelters to overcome this dynamic for cats. So if we want to reduce shelter euthanasia, reducing intake is the most profound impact we can have. So this is all of the cats in our community, all the outdoor pet cats. So pet cats, the outdoor community cats, most of whom we're not doing anything to. Those cats in the red, they're going outdoors, they never come into the shelter, they never come into our TNR program. The vast majority of cats in our community we have no interaction with. We see about 3% of those cats coming through the shelter, and we see about 4% of those cats coming through our TNR program. So this really begs the question is, what if we didn't take cats into the shelter? Would that actually impact what's happening in the community, either on the side of cat welfare or on the side of quality of life of our residents? Probably not. We are processing such a tiny fraction of the outdoor cats through our shelter. And that's what this little graph shows. One tiny little bit of the cat population is coming in. It costs us about $500,000 to take in all those stray cats. And our euthanasia rate has plummeted, but it's still almost 50% for cats. Most of these cats that come in actually look pretty good. They're brought in as strays, either through our TNR program or to the shelter, and most of them are not sickly. They're pretty healthy, and they're there because people think that cats shouldn't be free roaming, and that if a cat is found as a stray, the best thing that can be done for it is to bring it to the shelter, because that's what we've taught people. But we know that many of them are doing okay, and they're not a serious menace to our communities. Feeding of these cats is very common. Some very interesting data is that of lost cats, they are 13 times more likely to come home on their own than they are by going to a shelter. So one of the missions of shelters is to reunite lost pets with their owners. But for cats, actually, we may be a hindrance to that because people don't actually go to shelters in time to look for their lost cats. And it's even more fascinating that most people adopt cats directly from the street than coming to a shelter by 2 to 1. So a cat may actually be more likely to be adopted if you leave it in the neighborhood than if you bring it into the shelter for adoption. And we think that survival is reasonable. This is the hardest number to get, but in some places up to 90% survival each year. So the good news and bad news, depending on your point of view, taking in or not taking in every single cat the instant it is prevented will neither solve nor cause major problems. So we're being a little bit grand to think that our shelter programs are having a huge impact on cats in the community. So the reality check is that community cats may or may not cause problems. They may kill birds. They may spread rabies. That may be true. But programs that impact only a tiny proportion of the cats in communities are not going to change that. But killing cats in shelters really accomplishes nothing if we're only going to kill a small number. But it's definitely not good for cats or shelters. So cats can live in our communities very successfully and happily, or they can try to live in a typical Florida shelter, which may not be the most successful and happy place for them or for shelters. And so Kate actually coined this phrase, no frill, no kill. And she suggests that if shelter euthanasia in cats is high in your community, that it may be better to just leave community cats where they live. Have a safety net for those sick, injured, or dangerous animals that you need to bring in. Admit just enough cats to meet your adoption needs. So if your shelter's adopting out 500 cats like Jacksonville was, you don't need to admit 15,000 with the hopes that you're giving them a chance for adoption. TNR as many of those cats as you can and chip away at that population, improve the lives for those cats. But if you can't TNR them, consider just leaving them there. It wouldn't actually change too much of what's happening in the community, but it would have a dramatic impact on shelter killing. So it's a whirlwind introduction to this concept of maybe leaving at least some cats in our community, even if they're not part of TNR programs. I'd like to just ask a poll of you and the sort of options about leaving cats in the community. And this would be feral cats and friendly cats, so all community cats. You're desperate, you'll try anything. You're willing to try it out as a small pilot program. You'd like to try it, but there is no way people in your community would accept it. Too much opposition. You'd like to try it, but you think it's against the law. Or you don't think you'd like to do it because you think it's bad for cats. So how many people would go in the first category of being desperate, you'd try anything at this point? So a few. Anybody doing anything like this? In some states like Ohio, most of the dog shelters don't take in cats at all. They're not allowed to. You'd like to try it, really give some consideration to carving out a little pilot project and giving it a shot to see what happens. How many of those? Some experimentalists. You'd like to try it, but you just don't think you could get any support for it. I think that's more common. You think it's against the law, that you're obligated to take in cats in your shelters. Interestingly, a lot of people say that when we're working with shelters that are extremely overcrowded, at least in Florida, or they're having a disease outbreak, one of our recommendations is frequently stop intake. And shelters will say, we're a municipal shelter, we have to stay open. And for cats, that's usually not true. For dogs, it frequently is. But then we'll go look at the code, and very often the only thing that the shelter is legally obligated to do is deal with dangerous dogs, a very small number of the population. So when you have to, you actually can shut shelter intake totally or to certain populations to deal with a crisis. Or you think that this is just a bad idea for cats, that we should just keep an open door policy for any cat that someone wants to bring in. Usually somebody raises their hand for that. I'm usually so intimidating by then that that's not the answer I want to hear. So I think this is interesting. I think there's some places we need to look at this. There's some interest. Dr. Hurley's consulting with a shelter that was just in miserable condition in Sutter County in California, and they were investigated by the grand jury. Cats were more likely to die in the shelter than get out through adoption, and they're implementing this, and they're trying it, and they're getting some decent community support for it.